I mean, see, this shows just how much of a fraud Joe Goldberg is, but not in the way that you think. Hi, I'm Tom Ayling. I'm an antiquarian bookseller, someone who deals in rare books and manuscripts, and I've lost track over the last couple of years how many times someone's come into the bookshop or in my comments section online and said, "Are you like Joe Goldberg, or do you have a glass cage in your basement?" So today we're going to examine Joe's credentials as an antiquarian bookseller, look at some of the scenes in You that show rare books and first editions, and see if he's better at being a bookseller than he is at being a boyfriend. And if you want to see more content like this from me, then please subscribe. So let's start by having a look at Joe's bookshop.
You like a little attention. Okay, I bite. You search the books, fiction.
In all of these upstairs scenes, it looks like a pretty busy second-hand bookshop, but it's also massive. I mean, the New York rent on this place must be killing him.
You probably knew that since you work at a bookstore.
I didn't.
How'd you get to work here anyway?
Mr. Mooney gave me a job when I was just a little older than you. He sort of took me in.
Seems nice.
Okay, so upstairs looks like standard used second-hand books, but maybe downstairs we'll see some rare books.
It's the cage. It's where we keep early editions and collectibles.
Yeah, I'll just say, I don't know of a bookshop in the world that has a glass cage in their basement. Generally, basements are terrible places to store books because they're cold and damp. Some bookshops might have a small safe somewhere to store very valuable books, but hey, maybe some of Joe's books will turn out to be valuable. Yeah, so these books aren't of any difference in terms of value to the ones upstairs. They're just general second-hand books for the most part. I can see one triple-decker Victorian novel that's not in very nice condition. There's a couple of collected works of authors in cloth bindings, but these late 19th, early 20th century just copies of books aren't particularly valuable. So it's clear that Joe's got this cage down here for some other reason. Okay, so next scene we're going to have a look at one of Beck's friends' home libraries. So okay, this looks like a really nice home library, and we've zoomed in here on a set of the Wizard of Oz books. Hugely collectible as a series and very, very valuable if you've got all of them in first edition. So let's take a closer look. Okay, so Joe's pulled out Ozma of Oz, which is the third book in the series. It was originally published in 1907, but we can see here this one isn't a first edition. I'll show you here what the first edition really looks like. And if we compare it to Joe's, you can see that Joe's is actually, this copy's from the 1920s, so it's just a later reprint, not particularly valuable. So that one wasn't a real first edition, but let's skip forward to season 4 of the show and see if they've got any better at showing real first editions.
First, are you by chance a fan of Winston Churchill? I thought you might be, so we here at Darcy have a rare first edition of My Early Life, notated by the man himself.
Well, I'll be. That is incredible, Joe.
Okay, so they've done well here. This is actually a first edition of Winston Churchill's My Early Life. That's a volume of autobiography that he published in 1930. But one thing kind of bugs me about this, and Joe says that it's notated by the man himself. That's not a term any real bookseller would use when they're describing a book. He might mean that it's annotated by Churchill, implying that it's Churchill's own copy, marked up by him with lots of scribbles in the margins. That would be an incredibly valuable book. Or he might, by notated, means that it's signed or inscribed by him, written in by him, maybe presented to someone and given away as a gift. Either one of those options make this a very valuable book, but it's clear, I think, from Joe's description, that this is signed or written in by Churchill in some way.
This is where you'll find him.
Yeah, that's a pretty narcissistic move. I mean, writing a random address in a book signed by Churchill, that's really going to screw with its value.
Go be your best self.
And that they're throwing the book casually back to him, that's really interesting to me, because earlier in the scene when he first saw the book, he pretended to be impressed by it, and he's obviously pretending to be infatuated or admiring of these great figures of history, but it's all superficial because he's willing just to toss it back and writing it like it's nothing. Okay, last clip, we're going back to season 1, and this might be one of the most controversial rare book moments in You.
I thought we said no gifts.
Did we? I must have missed that.
Bunny. My favorite.
Okay, so we can see that Joe's given her a copy of Wuthering Heights, and it's in a kind of tacky green leather binding. It might not actually even be real leather looking closely at it.
It's a first edition.
Really? I'll cherish it forever.
Okay, so we have Joe saying here that it's a first edition of Wuthering Heights, and we also can see that he's written an inscription in it. Now, the real first edition of Wuthering Heights is a seriously valuable book, a 6-figure book, and it's rare there are only 250 copies thought to have been printed of it. But having just seen the binding, and more importantly, the page that Joe's written the inscription on, I can tell you that this is not a first edition of Wuthering Heights. This page here with just the title of the book written on it is called the half title page. This usually comes immediately before the title page, where you have the title, the author and the publication information all on one page. And the interesting thing about the first edition of Wuthering Heights is that it doesn't have one. The first printed page of text there is the title page. So we have two options here. Either Joe's lying about it being a first edition to try and impress his girlfriend, or the show just couldn't source one for the purposes of filming, which would be totally understandable. It's a really rare book, and I don't know many people who'd be willing to lend one out willy-nilly.
Be with me always. Take any form. Drive me mad. Only do not leave me in this abyss.
Okay, let's stop here because this is showing us a really important clue. Because this says, or should say, biographical notice of Ellis and Acton Bell. Now you can't see the whole thing because it's a bit charred, but you can make out that that's what is actually there. And it's there because the Bronte sisters originally published their books under male pseudonyms, but in 1850, after the death of Anne and Emily Bronte, Charlotte Bronte wrote a new introduction to Wuthering Heights. And it's exactly this, the biographical notice of Ellis and Acton Bell, and it explains why they chose to use male pseudonyms for their novels. But if we put the 1850 introduction side by side with Joe's, we can see that they're not the same thing. The typesetting is different for the two titles. So based on this, I'm thinking Joe's is later, probably late 19th century, maybe even early 20th century, but either way, we're not talking anymore about a valuable book. We're definitely not talking about a first edition. So again, what does it come down to? Is Joe lying, or could they just not source one for the show?
Mooney always told me, a book is far greater than most hands it passes through. Some simply aren't worthy. That's why it's up to people like us, people who believe in second chances.
Yeah, I think this clinches it, and it's this that shows how much of a fraud Joe Goldberg is, but not in the way that you normally think when you watch the show. Because here he has something that he says is a first edition of Wuthering Heights. Any bookseller worth their salt, or even someone who doesn't know much about books, is going to know that the first edition of Wuthering Heights is hugely valuable. And yet he's taken the scalpel to it, torn it apart, and then left a copy of what he claims is a first edition of Wuthering Heights on a discount shelf. Now, I don't think Joe's that dumb. I think this shows that it isn't a first edition of Wuthering Heights, and he knew it all along, and he just claimed it was in order to try and impress his girlfriend. So unfortunately, it turns out that Joe is just as duplicitous and deceitful in his book dealing as he is in his relationships. If you've enjoyed this video and want to see more long form content from me, then please subscribe, like the video and leave a comment. I've been making short form content on other platforms for ages, so I really wanted to try this out. And if you want to follow me elsewhere, then my links and the links of the bookshop that I work at are in the description below.